Good afternoon, everyone. This hearing is called to order. This is a public hearing of the City Council Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. The purpose of this public hearing is to hear testimony on Bill number 180704 and Bill number 180975. I recognize the presence of a quorum of committee members. Members of the committee in attendance are Councilman Allen Dom, Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown, Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, and Councilmember Al Taubenberger. Would any of my colleagues like to take this opportunity to make any opening remarks? The clerk will now read the title of the first bill being considered today.
Bill number 180704, an ordinance amending Chapter 17-1600 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Economic Opportunity Plans by requiring the Labor Standards Unit to monitor contractors and enforce city contract requirements for workforce diversity, all under certain terms and conditions.
The clerk will please call the first panel of witnesses to testify on the bill.
Paridi, DiVirgilio, and Jahad Ali.
Good afternoon, Mr. DiVirgilio and Mr. Ali. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Paridi DiVirgilio, Director of Labor Standards, under the Mayor's Office of Labor.
Jahad Ali with the Enterprise Center.
Okay, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development. My name is Paridi DiVirgilio. I'm the Director of Labor Standards for the Mayor's Office of Labor. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to testify in favor of Bill number 180704 as amended. Bill number 180704 will amend Chapter 17-1600 of the Philadelphia Code Economic Opportunity Plans by further refining the role of the Labor Standards Unit in monitoring contractors and enforcing city contract requirements for workforce diversity. The bill will require the Labor Standards Unit to determine whether a contractor is on track to meet workforce goals at a specific point in the contract. Once 25% of the hours and 25% of spend are completed, and it also allows to take appropriate action pursuant to 17-1606 penalties and remedies if best and good faith efforts are not evident at that time. The administration supports the intent behind the legislation. Workforce diversity monitoring has been a responsibility of the Labor Standards Unit since 17-1600 was amended in 2016. In the years since, we have developed reporting requirements for contractors around workforce diversity and implemented a best and good faith efforts form that covered contractors must submit as a prerequisite to be issued a notice to proceed. The changes contemplated under Bill number 180704 aligns with our internal goals of continuously improving our enforcement protocols to ensure that our contracted workforce is representative of the citizens of this city. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. I would be happy to answer any questions members may have.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and other members of this distinguished committee. I'm Jahad Ali. I have an extensive background in construction. As Mr. DiVirgilio said, he reminded me when he came in, we're both getting gray. I told him I'd try to stay out the mirror because I forget that I'm getting gray. I'm here to give testimony on Bill 180704 in support of the bill. I think that this is a new bill that another tool for this council to use as we go forward trying to break the chains of poverty. This action that this council is doing is a continuation of that action that was started by Councilman Good. It's a continuation of everything that Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown has done. Councilman Kenyatta, Sherelle Parker, Darrell Clark, Jones, Janie Blackwell, Lucian Blackwell, all the council people that have been committed to that, as well as the Councilman David O. and the rest of y'all that are members of this committee. One thing I would like to say in reading the bill, I agree with everything Mr. DiVirgilio said. But the part about the 25% at the staging, the timing of that. So I would just like to at least have you consider that if we're going to do that for the first 25% of the total project labor and 25% for the total expended dollar value, let's again look back again at the 50% mark and the 75% mark. It may be, but from my reading of it, I didn't know if that was a continuation. Would you just get to the 25% mark and then say, okay, well, they made it? Because what will happen, all the forces that are in opposition to breaking those chains of poverty may position themselves to just get to the 25% mark. And they say, okay, we're good. We're good. Everybody green lights it. Okay, they've achieved that. They've achieved 25% of the dollar spent. And then we move on to another project. When then at the end of that, we really should be coming back at the 50% mark and maybe the 75% mark. I also wanted to ask this committee to consider the language, because in this language you say contract. And one thing about the OEO regulations that this council has done over the years, you've made a couple exceptions. And one of those is covered project, all phases of a covered project. And that's wording we need to just talk about for a second. A covered project, all phases, is not just the contract dollars. All phases are something that Councilwoman Blondell is always about, the soft stuff, the architects, the consultants, all that stuff. So we should at least consider covered project, because it might be some retweaking of the labor enforcement standards regulation, because they just use that word contract and covered contract. But it's really, I just wanted you to consider the covered all phases of a covered project. And that would be anything that council authorizes, because we run into that a lot with zoning. And I remember, Ms. Parker, you talked before, why aren't we asking for that OEO stuff at zoning? It clearly says it in the legislation. So I think those two things we need to just look at going forward. But I think this is a tremendous step. And like Mr. DeGilio used the word best practices. There's an author, Peter Thiel, he says, you know, best practices always lead to a beaten path. We need new and innovative things. And I think this is a new and innovative thing, but we need to push everybody ahead, and we need to refine some anticipated hurdles that we need to overcome, like the 50% mark and the 75% mark. And at the end of the day, when the next guys are sitting here that used to be young, they will say, hey, we're breaking those chains of poverty. Thank you for allowing me to give testimony today.
Can I address this first?
Sure, yes.
Just to bring a little clarity to this, Labor Standards Unit, our intentions is to do this every 25%. So it's not just the first 25%.
Can you ask me to repeat that? Repeat that for the record, Mr. DiVirgilio.
That the intentions of the labor standards is that we're going to do this enforcement every 25%. So 25% of the contract being completed, 50, 75, and then upon completion of the contract. It's not just the first 25%.
So one, let me just thank you, Mr. DiVirgilio and Mr. Ali, for your testimony here today. I want to note for the record, for those seated in the chamber and those who may be watching us at home, Bill number 180704 was introduced by Council Member Bass for our Council President, Darrell Clark. This is essentially one more tool. One more tool in the toolbox that our Department of Labor Standards and our entire city of Philadelphia needs to ensure that there is accountability when we talk about diversity and inclusion relative to doing business with the city of Philadelphia. So I want to thank both of you for your testimony, and Mr. DiVirgilio, I want to thank you very specifically for accurately noting that the 25% mark, see, usually sometimes people want to check and they want to give you numbers when they're 75% through the project and they only have 25% on the back end that they're waiting for. But what this language does is ensure that every step, and now that you have clarified for the record for us that these are increments of 25%, we know that it will happen consistently throughout the project. So I want to thank you for that clarity. Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
This measure and new tool is another example where Philadelphia, through President Clark and Councilwoman Bass, have discovered that we have to drill down even further, because we still have primes who have figured out a way to skirt the law. And I want to thank them in their absence for this, because at the end of the day, it really is about workforce diversity. Getting the contract is just a morsel of the expectation. If at the end of the day, the workforce doesn't look like the city of Philadelphia, then we have failed in our duties, period. Can you speak to how well you're coming along now? Because I know during budget testimony a year ago, challenges face your department due to lack of personnel to help carry out the multiple laws that we pass out of this committee.
The Mayor's Office of Labor has definitely helped us with bringing some additional people on, so things are going a lot better. What this does for me is it codifies some of the things that we're already doing, the procedures we're trying to put in place. Whereas before, contractors could kind of push back and say, well, we're not in compliance now, but we will be by the end of the project. This takes that away. So this is a good tool for us.
That language is over.
Right.
What are the penalties, if you will, or circumstances by which the contract itself becomes jeopardized because of failure to honor the tenets and merits of this legislation?
I mean, I can't quote them, but they're in the original bill. So, I mean, whatever the penalties are what we're going to enforce.
And does your department carry on that duty, or is that punted to another department?
It actually gets punted to another department, but we make the recommendation.
Okay. All right.
Now, with the first part, with the workforce diversity form, when they submit that, I actually approve it or I don't, and they don't get their notice to proceed until it's approved. So that's been in place for a while now.
Okay.
And we're definitely noticing improvement in the submission of them forms.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen.
You're welcome.
May I add something, Council, Madam Chair?
Sure.
In regards to the testimony of labor standards, I can only go by what's written in the bill. So from the public's point of view, we need to look at the bill. One thing that made this country great is remembering that the people that are in power will be our power one day, and there'll be other people there. So we need to have the tools on the other people there to be able to look in the bill and see that. In regards to labor standards, one additional thing, because this office is trying to do a great job against a mountain of problems out there. But one of the things is to ask the mayor through his office to make sure that they have the funds in place to get additional resources when they need them. For instance, sometimes on my side of the table, I hear from union guys and other guys. And another thing about this bill, this is a neutral bill. It doesn't matter whether you're union or non-union, because we have the same problems from non-union developers as we have from union developers. They still trying to make the most, in the case of the private developers, the non-union, they're trying to make the most of the money. And the union developers, they're trying to make the most for the men on the job, but they're only excluded, they're only looking out for union people. One of the things that happens with labor standards is somebody could give you a report. If there's no red flag on that report to indicate that something doesn't seem right, it won't trigger a flag. Somebody could say they're doing a project and they could undercount the amount of manpower on there. And if there's no red flag or labor standards doesn't have the resources to go out and count heads and check, then there's no flag to trigger a further investigation to substantiate what he's putting in. And since we're putting in for, like you said, Madam Chair, you said we're looking out for the workforce of Philadelphia. But we're involved in this business with other entities that their workforce is within the whole region. So we're looking out for ourselves, as we should, because they're your constituents. But there's other guys that's going to be fighting you saying, you know what? We don't care about just being Philly. We have to man this job, and we're going to do it any way we can. I think that this is a step, another tool for you to fight. Like any craft, whatever, you use all the tools in your toolbox. So I think this is a great step, and I think DeGilio are doing a great job. We just need to give them more resources to do more.
Thank you. Chair recognizes, well, one, we have been joined by Council Member at Large, Councilman Derek Green. Chair recognizes, and Councilman David O. to my right. Chair recognizes Councilmember Taubenberger.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. A question I have is, how do we know that companies are in compliance, and how often will they be checked?
Basically through the certified payrolls.
Through what? I'm sorry.
The first step is through them submitting certified payrolls through our
Gotcha.
LCP tracker system.
Okay.
And I have wage compliance officers that go through the certified payrolls, not only for prevailing wage, but I have a full-time person that's actually doing the workforce diversity stuff. Then I also have 2 full-time inspectors that actually go out on the site and interview workers. So we check the certified payrolls against the interview sheets.
So the certified payroll would be checked first,
Yes, absolutely.
and then there will be some field?
Well, basically
inspections?
what will happen is we'll get the interview sheets, but then would have to wait until the certified payroll was submitted to be able to do the comparison.
Okay.
But there is checks and
And
balances.
one last question on this. Who certifies the payroll, that this is the right payroll? Is that your department?
What do you mean by?
Well, you said is certified payroll,
Well, they have to certify it when they submit it.
that's what I meant. Like
The
they-
contractor
okay, so
certifies
they certify it.
Yes,
Okay. Okay.
yes.
Madam Chair, thank you.
Can I answer your question?
Oh, sure.
Follow up on that? One thing about, you really need to hit the nail on the head when you said, how do they substantiate this? And the reply was, we look at their certified payrolls. That's the point that I'm talking about. When that payroll comes in, say we were going to all build this room, but we got a payroll report that just said 2 people built this room. Now, if there's not somebody there to substantiate, to do an analysis to say,
Correct.
it's impossible for 2 guys to make that with 4,000 hours, right? So we need to look at this further. And hearing the explanation, there has to be additional resources to do analysis to see that these guys are doing this. Because we're talking about, if this happens on a little job, what happens when we're building a $1 billion hospital? Like
Sure.
that's happening in Councilwoman Blackwell's district.
Or a skyscraper or something.
Right. So there needs to be a way to check that. And what we're seeing now, there's a glitch in the system. Because if the only way is for a human being to look at a certified payroll, and then as long as all that, the hours are there and the deductions are there, there's no red flag. There's nobody to say it's impossible for this developer to build this building and have this workforce that he's telling us. So we need to have a way to check that. The responsible person for any company, whoever that responsible person they designate, he signs on the back of that form. Now that form, I don't know if does your form have the penalties on it from the United States Code? If you,
Yes.
yeah. So that's why the form is so powerful, because you're alleging, you're giving your signature that you're complying with the law.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Ali. We want you to know for the record that your points of clarity are very well taken, and we hear you, and we are constantly, I think all of my colleagues are constantly communicating with Mr. DiVirgilio to ensure that his office is properly staffed, because we can, codify anything we want relative to the law, and if there is not an adequate staff to go out and measure from an accountability perspective, it is all for naught. So we appreciate you adding that for the record. Are there any other comments from members of the committee for the witnesses? Councilwoman Reynolds Brown?
Yes. So we listened very carefully during the budget hearings, March 2017, and the administration followed through and provided you with additional staff.
Yes.
Can you speak to any instance or circumstance where there was discovery that a prime or sub was not honoring the workforce diversity piece and indeed were penalized? Have we penalized anybody in the city of Philadelphia?
The procedures that we've been putting in place is we've come up with a level 1 compliance letter.
A number 1?
Level 1 compliance letter, that when the contractor's not in compliance, that we send that out first and we give them an opportunity, because it's best in good faith efforts, it's not a hard line. So we give them an opportunity that if they're not reaching their goals, that they have to give us a substantiated reason why. And then it just goes on from there. But as of yet, we haven't penalized anybody yet.
And so this measure is how old, point of information? I don't know the answer to that.
Say it again?
The regulation in the, that, help me out, John
Called
Christmas.
it like first level, you said first level review, is that what you called it?
When was
First
it?
level
May,
compliance letter.
First level compliance?
May 2016? May 2016. Is that the accurate date? Okay, all right, so since May 2016, you have the authority, responsibility, and I would
Yes.
say duty to penalize, quite frankly, those who don't read from the sheet of music. And what I'm hearing you say is, to date, you have discovered that everyone is honoring the sheet of music. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's not what I said. I just said we haven't actually penalized anybody yet. Other than, well, actually we did. When we sent out the level 1 compliance letter, the people that just ignored our letter and didn't respond, we stopped their payments.
Stop their payments. Did they lose the contract?
No,
Does
their
stopping
payments got stopped.
equal-
Their payments got stopped until they submitted the information that we requested.
Okay. So I need you to submit to the chair those companies that have fallen in any a space that speaks to lack of compliance. We need to see what the number is. We need to see how effective this law is or is not, because we may need to drill down and tweak it more.
Okay.
So if you could provide that to the chair, by when? You give me a date.
I mean, I'll start on it as soon as I get back to the office.
Okay, so by when? You give me a date. By the end of November? We could have that?
That's
Or
fine.
is that reasonable?
That's fine.
Okay, then, if you could submit that to the chair so we can do a look-see.
Okay.
Ms.
No
Brown,
problem.
Ms. Brown, may I just comment real quick on that? I'd just like to refer to, it's not DeGilio, he's a friend of mine, we were young together. I like to say the administration, so when I refer to his office. And I would say that he said that the administration sends out the first level compliance letter. That should be the first level non-compliance letter. Not compliance, because they're not in compliance. And then the further testimony was that, well, they've already stopped some payments. So there was some non-compliance that they resulted to that penalty. So at the end of the day, it's the administration that really needs to put some teeth in this for us to be able to stop somebody. When you stop somebody's payment, you're going to get something. You're going to get some notice. This bill would stop your payment at 25%. So you're going to catch them up front, and then you're going to catch them again. So we really need to be thinking, what happens at the second occurrence? The first occurrence, you just, even to stop somebody's payment, you get the right lawyer in there, somebody with the caliber of Mr. Christmas over there, you're going to return that money after that first holdback, because you haven't taken the steps necessary to warn him about that non-compliance action. So we just need to think about it a little bit more. But it's real, in my mind, it's this council against the administration. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Virgilio, you want to
Yeah.
follow up?
Part of the reason why I said, I know the administration agrees with this bill, but I personally agree with it, was that there was pushback from contractors to say that we're not in compliance now, but we can be by the end of the contract. This takes that away from them. So, I mean, at the 25% mark now, you'll see compliance. So, it definitely helps my office a lot.
Councilwoman Reynolds Brown, and I want you to just help me with this. I think and I'm following up on your request for information. I want to make sure that includes, one, a list of all of the first level compliance letters that you sent out. So every firm that has ever been on the list to get one of those letters, we want to know who they are. And then all of the firms who you sent the letter, but you had to stop their payments because they didn't. We want to know too, who were the firms whose payments had to be stopped because they didn't comply with our rules and regs. And then that's just, because that's developing a track record.
Right, absolutely.
As people consistently attempt to do work across the city of Philadelphia. And when we will also get a chance to see our own first level review, who is taking seriously the rules and regs that this council is seeking to get codified to ensure that we have diversity and inclusion amongst those who are doing business in the city of Philadelphia. So,
That's
Councilwoman?
precisely it.
Okay, all right. Thank you
No
so
problem.
very much. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee for these witnesses before we go? Okay, thank you so
Thank you. Have a
very
good day,
much.
everybody.
The clerk will now read the title of the second bill being considered today.
Bill number 180975, an ordinance authorizing the City Commerce Department on behalf of the City of Philadelphia to enter into an agreement with the Philadelphia Authority for Industrial Development and the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau, both for the purpose of hosting the Army-Navy intercollegiate football game in certain years under certain terms and conditions.
The clerk will please call the first panel of witnesses to testify on the bill.
I just have Julie Coker-Graham.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so very much. Just please state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Julie Coker-Graham, President and CEO of the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau, and I have my colleague with me, Executive Director Larry Needle of the Philadelphia Sports Congress. So, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commerce Economic Development Committee. My name is Julie Coker. As we discussed, I'm here today to testify in support of Bill number 180975, an ordinance authorizing the City Commerce Department to enter into an agreement with the Philadelphia Authority for Industrial Development, PAID, and the PHL-CVB to host the Army-Navy intercollegiate football game for a 4-year series which would begin this December on the 8th. In August of 2017, the Academy has accepted the PHL-CVB and the city's proposal to host the annual game at Lincoln Financial Field for the following years, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2022. The game in 2021 will be played in New York in honor of 9/11. The PHL-CVB is proud to have successfully won the bid to continue to host this important and historical game in conjunction with the City of Philadelphia and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. According to a study that we conducted in 2016, the Army-Navy game festivities attract over 54,000 visitors to the Philadelphia region. They generate close to 31,000 room nights and have a total estimated economic impact of $35 million each time the game is played here in Philadelphia. Army-Navy is traditionally one of the biggest weekends of the year for our city's hospitality weekend community, and our community, as you know, is now the second largest employment sector for Philadelphia, and we support over 73,000 jobs. It's also a tremendous opportunity for our city to roll out the red carpet to our nation's military community who travel to Philadelphia while millions of fans watch across the nation. The game has a special history in our great city that started in 1899 and has included games at Franklin Field, JFK Stadium, Veterans Stadium, and now the Lincoln Financial Field. This year will mark the 88th time that Philadelphia has hosted the game in its illustrious 119-year history. I respectfully request that City Council suspends the rules so as to allow for first-time reading of Bill number 180975 at the next session of Council. Thank you very much, and a special thank you to Councilman Johnson for introducing. And I'm happy to answer any questions about the game.
Thank you. Councilman Derek Green. Councilman Derek Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Just a couple of quick questions. I was not able to make the last Phil meeting, board meeting. And am I correct in my understanding that part of the Philadelphia Hospitality Improvement Levy will be used to support this initiative? Am I correct in that response?
Yes. In the past, the city's commitment has been $450,000 per game. With the Phil, the commitment has been now reduced to $150,000, and $300,000 will now come from the Phil.
Okay, so $300,000 from the Phil, and then $100,000 from the city's general fund. Okay, and then another question. This is more of a macro question. I know that other large sporting events, especially in the world of soccer, has often been in New York when teams like Man City or Manchester United, others, or other teams like Barcelona come to the States. Often those are New York, LA type, or maybe even Chicago initiatives. Has there been conversation about trying to bring those type of events to the city as well, which could also provide opportunities? I know we have the International Unity Cup that Councilman Thunberger is a very strong supporter of, but are those other types of opportunities available for the city of Philadelphia to bring other sporting venues different than an Army-Navy game, but still provide economic impact to our city, especially when we have such a large and growing international and immigrant population?
Absolutely, and thank you. That's a great question. Yes. So Larry and his entire team work throughout the year to secure events that can be played indoors or outdoors. As you know, we have our bid for in 2026 that we're hoping that we'll be successful in. But definitely, we are considered one of the premier sports towns here in Philadelphia. We roll out the red carpet. Actually, to help secure the Army-Navy bid for the next 4 out of 5 years, we actually had the folks from the academies come down for the NFL draft. And so they were able to see how successful we were in maneuvering the number of folks on the Parkway and throughout the city. So we continue to host high-profile events, especially Army-Navy game and NFL draft, that put the city on an international and national stage, and of course with the partnership with the city and the Commonwealth, and of course In this particular case, Lincoln Financial and the Eagles were definitely set up for success for future, but we do pursue those opportunities.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Are we running a little tight on time? Because I noticed December 8th is when the game's going to be played, and we're just approving it. We're looking to approve it now?
So, yes, and so I'll tell you, we've been working very closely with the academies. The contract for the game is extremely intricate, and so there have been some spirited negotiations, I would say, on everyone's part, and certainly looking for the best interest of Philadelphia as well as the academies. And so we find ourselves at this hour. We did reach out to the academies 2 to 3 years ago, hoping that we wouldn't have to go through the bid process because we've done such a great job over the years. But this game has really become a bowl game for us. And so there were a number of cities that were bidding against us, and so we had to kind of sharpen our pens. And so we find ourselves in this close proximity time frame. But there have been, I think, fair negotiations, and I think we're all in a very good space.
I have 2 other questions. Have we done a total fiscal impact analysis of the 35 million that it generates compared to the 6 million we have to pay them, compared to all the other income and expenses that occur, where we can actually point to a bottom line? And I'm in favor of the game. I'm just saying, is there any kind of an analysis that we've done that would show a bottom line number?
We do. We have a detailed budget of the game that we go into the game with, and certainly control expenses as much as we possibly can. We also, in our organization, do fundraising to help make it a weekend. So when Army-Navy first came, it was just the day of the game, and many folks would just come for the day. And now we've been able to include a gala that happens on Friday night, so we have economic impact on Friday as well as Saturday. But the expenses are very much controlled. Obviously, playing a game in December, really the only unknown would be the weather, which can oftentimes work out in our favor depending on snow insurance. But for the most part, we do know that the food and beverage that is spent throughout the city, whether it be in the hotels as well as outside of the hotels, in addition to the visibility of the game itself, definitely does have a return on investment. Also, too, when you're applying to the Phil, there has to be at least an 8-to-1 ratio for the Phil to even approve a convention or sporting event. And this event, if I'm not mistaken, is between 28, it's like a 28-to-1.
Okay. And one last question. I noticed that we asked for 2018, 19, 20, 21, and 22, and we didn't get 2021. Is there any reason why we didn't get 2021?
In respect of 9/11, it's going to be hosted in New York. So the
Okay.
academies chose to go to New York for 2021.
Okay. Thank
So
you very much.
that was hard for us to sell against.
Right. I understand. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you. Excellent questions, Councilman Don. In addition to the articulation of where the dollars are coming from, as has been outlined by Councilman Green, any other nuances that have not been asked in this hearing that we should be aware of as it relates to the Army-Navy game?
Well, I was just going to mention the $6 million that the councilman mentioned, which is the guarantee for the game. The vast majority of those revenues actually come from ticket sales around the game. So the obligation ultimately that comes back to the city is actually much less than that.
Repeat your last statement, pull the mic
The
closer.
actual financial commitment, that the city realizes around the game is much less than the $6 million guarantee. The actual ticket revenues from the game are somewhere between $4 and $5 million, and those are the initial revenues that count against the guarantee. And then whatever the balance is ultimately that's left to get to the $6 million becomes the obligation of the city.
Okay, all right. And in addition to the financial reward that the city enjoys, wherever the city makes an investment of any amount, I'm always looking for opportunities where Philadelphia public school children can benefit. So as a part of your negotiate, and given the stature of the Army-Navy game and what it represents in the future it can hold for young people, any linkages with the Philadelphia School District in any way, shape, form, or fashion?
Absolutely.
If I could, we have a great relationship with the school district and the JROTC program, and we now have done this for, I want to say, 15 years or more. We host now a total of 350 young people through the JROTC program at the game each year.
Okay.
250 of them are from Philadelphia School District, 100 are from the Camden School District. And each game, we first bring them to South Philadelphia High School and give them a program just so they can have an understanding of what they're going to see, what the academies are all about, and how Special Army Navy is. We give them a food voucher, we give them a ticket, and give them transportation over to the game so that they're able to enjoy that experience.
That's outstanding. I'm pleased to hear that. And so as we look down the road to the future and looking at the glass as half full and knowing that Philadelphia already does a great job when it comes to hospitality and tourism, given our track record with Army Navy, in future negotiations, is there any consideration to increasing that number? Because there are 100+ thousand students in Philadelphia public schools, not even thinking about charters, and I don't know what percentage of those are high school students, but the more we can touch their imagination during that period, the better it is for all of us. So 350 is a great number, but if we're going to be in this for the long haul for another 4, 5, 6 years, then I would like to see that number grow to 1,000, so that each year in the new contract, we're touching more and more young people. Young people who are in JROTC have been exposed to that experience. There are gazillion students who don't have a clue what those letters mean. And so I'm asking that as you look to the future, that you find a way to touch young people in grades 9 through 12 who don't have a clue what JROTC is, but could be inspired if they were invited to the game. And so all of the high schools, now I'm thinking ideally, every high school should have young people represented at that game, even if it's just a dozen or 6. That's the way I think we create impact in the lives of young people for the investment that this city is making with the city dollars.
That's a great point, and absolutely, we accept that challenge.
Okay, so going forward then, presuming you win, that number will increase.
And we always win, so yes, we will take that challenge on.
Okay. All right, then, thank you for what you do on behalf of the city and this industry. It's admirable.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Councilman Taubenberger.
Madam Chair, thank you again, and Mr. Needle and Ms. Coker-Graham, thank you for what you're doing. I thank you for what you have done with our young people, but I would have to agree with my colleague, Councilwoman Reynolds-Brown, that more could be helpful too, because you might really inspire some lives, touch some people that you're not even thinking about, and change careers and do a lot of great things for our nation. The question I have for you, correct me if I'm wrong, it is not uncommon in past agreements with both Army and Navy that we allow a certain amount of out years in that agreement. Is that the case or not the case?
I'm sorry.
Like years where they could play like in Baltimore, or they could play in New York, or I think one year they actually played in California.
So the last round, we won 5 out of 7 games.
Okay.
And those 2 games that were not with us were done in D.C. and Baltimore.
Okay. Okay. And then this is not totally related, but it is related in the sense of upcoming 2026. Councilman Green is very to the mark, where I'm very interested in soccer, and it is the World Cup that's coming to the United States. When will they make their decision, and how are we doing, and is there anything this body could do?
You like me to answer?
Go for it.
Well, I want to win this bid here. I mean.
No, it's a big priority for us, needless to say, as we've discussed. The expectation is that FIFA and/or U.S. Soccer will be making the final determination on host cities sometime by the end of 2020. So all of us, as a city and region, need to be very focused on that bid over the next 18 months to make sure that Philadelphia goes from the current short list, which has approximately 23 cities.
In the United States, because I believe, if I'm correct, that we're sharing that with Canada and Mexico.
That's right. It's actually 17 U.S. cities. It's 23 when you include Canada and Mexico.
Okay.
And we expect that total number of 23 ultimately to be pared down to about 16. And our collective job is to make sure that we stay on that list and make that final cut.
And if there's anything you think this legislative body could do to enhance that, because this is a big deal. This would only be the second time in the history of FIFA World Cup that the games would be in the United States, and it would be wonderful to have one in our city, which has a lot of soccer heritage as well, because last time it was here, there were no games played in Philadelphia.
Right.
Not at all.
That's right.
Absolutely.
In 98.
And successfully hosting games like this certainly do help, because it shows what we can do as a
We
city.
can handle the crowd.
Absolutely.
We played at our stadium. And I think one thing we didn't have last time in the 90s when it was here, we did not have a natural turf field.
That's right.
The Veteran Stadium was
Right.
artificial, and so was Franklin Field. And that precluded us from being involved, and they must have a natural turf field, which we have now. and
Absolutely.
Maintained well. Thank you. Madam Chair, thank you very much.
Are there any other questions? This concludes the public hearing. I want to thank members of this panel for testifying, and we know that you all will continue this great legacy. In your testimony, did you say we've won 88 years?
Yes, we've hosted 88 out of the 19-year history.
Okay, all right. Okay, we want you to keep those eyes going, keep bringing it back here, and
Absolutely.
thank you all so very much.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.
This concludes the public hearing. We will now go into the public meeting to consider the action to be taken on Bill Number 180704 and Bill Number 180795. The chair recognizes Councilmember Johnson for a motion on amendments to Bill Number 180704 and Bill Number 180975.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Offering amendment to Bill Number 180704 and Bill Number 180975.
Second.
A copy of both amendments has been circulated to all members of the committee. I move that the amendments be approved. Seconded.
It has been moved and properly seconded that the amendments to Bill Number 180704 and 180975 be approved. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the ayes have it, and the motion carries, and the amendments to both bills are approved. The chair recognizes Councilmember Johnson for a motion on Bill Number 180704 as amended and Bill Number 180975 as amended.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I move that both bills as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of these bills at the next session of council.
Second.
It has been moved and properly seconded that bills numbers 180704 as amended and Bill Number 180975 as amended be reported from this committee with a favorable recommendation, and further move that the rules of council be suspended to permit first reading of these bills at the next session of council. All those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the ayes have it, and the motion carries. This concludes the business of the Committee on Commerce and Economic Development for today. Thank you all so very much for your attendance.